You stay seated at the desk, letting your eyes drift toward the nearest candle as if it's about to explain the mysteries of the universe. Instead, it just continues melting in that dependable, slightly judgmental way candles always have. You lean in a little, watching how the flame curls to one side before finding its steady center again. And this is where the logic of the whole system begins to reveal itself. You notice a faint line carved into the wax, one of several, evenly spaced, like the rib cage of a tiny glowing animal. Each notch marks an approximate hour, though approximate is doing some heavy lifting here. Still, it was enough for clerks who didn't have clocks, bells, or anything electronic, just fire and vibes. You trace a finger near, but not too near, the warm wax and think about the remarkable practicality behind the candle clock. It wasn't born out of elegance, but out of necessity. The kind of necessity that whispers, "Look, we've got candles and we've got tasks. Let's pretend melted fat equals time." A mainstream fact floats into your mind. Long before actual mechanical clocks became affordable for common offices, people across Europe used marked candles as reliable household timers. They burned at known rates, unless humidity, drafts, or low-quality wick ruined the plan, which, spoiler, happened often. You watch the clerk beside you preparing his own candle for measurement. He grips a short blade, trims the wick, and levels the top of the candle with the care of a surgeon trying not to upset a very temperamental patient. He hums softly, an off-key tune that suggests he's either bored or resigned to his fate, probably both. He turns the candle slowly in his hand, checking for air bubbles beneath the surface, one of the great enemies of accurate candle time. One bubble and your hour might vanish in 10 minutes. Historians still argue whether clerks deliberately chose poor-quality candles to shorten their shifts, or whether that's just modern people projecting their existential despair of watching something slowly melt. Honestly, it might still sell as an app. You rise from your chair and drift between the desks, taking in the strange mixture of precision and chaos this system creates. Some clerks rely heavily on candle markings, checking every so often with anxious glances. Others barely look, trusting muscle memory and the pace of their own handwriting. But all of them share the same glowing overseer, the flame. A quirkier tidbit reaches your thoughts, one you heard from a traveling chandler last night in the tavern. Some candles were infused with herbs that produced small crackles at predictable intervals. Essentially, sound-based time alerts centuries before notifications existed. Whether this actually worked or was just a clever sales pitch is debatable, but the idea of a candle going pop every hour is deeply charming. You hear one such pop now, and watch the clerk closest to it flinch in surprise, then pretend he totally meant to do that. You count that as today's little joke, courtesy of the universe. You make your way toward a long table near the back of the room. Over it hangs a chart, faded, curled at the edges, barely clinging to its nail. It lists candle-burning standards for the office, expectations for how long a 6-inch candle should last, how often wicks should be trimmed, and how to report inconsistencies. The rules are strict, bordering on obsessive. You skim one line. A candle that expires prematurely must be noted and replaced with haste. You raise an eyebrow. Imagine writing a report titled Unexpected Candle Death Incident. There's your second joke for the section. A clerk steps up beside you holding his own candle against the chart. You watch him purse his lips, calculating whether his candle's misbehavior is his fault, the chandler's fault, or the universe's ongoing prank. He mutters, "Draft again," and glances toward a narrow crack under the window frame where a cool breeze is sneaking in. He grabs a scrap of wool, stuffs it into the gap, and nods with satisfaction. The candle flame steadies. His mood improves by at least 2%, which is basically a miracle in this office. You turn to leave, but notice something curious on the far desk. A stack of thin wooden sticks with black marks burned into them. They look ceremonial, but they're actually reference sticks, burned alongside standard candles to verify burn rate consistency. The weird part is, each stick is unique to its maker, meaning every chandler had their own burn signature, like a secret wax fingerprint. Chandlers joked, lightly because humor was rationed here, that you could identify a candle maker from the shape of the soot bloom alone. Whether this is true, plausible, or complete historical gossip is unclear. Historians still argue whether chandler guilds purposely guarded these burn signatures the way modern companies guard algorithms. You step back into the main area of the office, and the logic of candle time unfolds further in your mind. Candles weren't just passive objects, they were active participants. They dictated work speed, they governed breaks, they exposed mistakes, and occasionally they tattled on clerks who tried to work too slowly. If your candle burned halfway down and you'd only finished 2 pages, everyone knew, no excuses. The candle does not lie. You glance again at your own candle on the desk. The flame bends gently, casting a warm ellipse of light across the parchment. The wax at the base has begun to puddle, forming a small mote that glows like captured sunlight. Your eyelids grow heavier, not from boredom, well, partially boredom, but from the steady pulse of the flame. Candle time isn't just a system, it's a rhythm that quiets the room, softens edges, and encourages you to slow down and pay attention to the tiny markers of the day. You let yourself settle into that rhythm too, breathing with the slow pace of a flame, watching hours melt into shape. And for just a moment, everything feels measured, predictable, even peaceful. Right until a clerk behind you mutters, "Already? But I just lit this." You turn to see his candle is nearly halfway gone. He stares at it in betrayal. "I didn't even sneeze." There's your third joke. You look back at your own flame, still steady, still patient, still marking time the old-fashioned way. You can't help but feel a strange admiration for the simplicity of it all. Fire and wax, telling a whole room when to breathe.
You drift back toward your desk, feeling the room settle into its familiar candle-governed rhythm. The farther the morning stretches, the more you start noticing the clutter and chaos that make up a clerk's life. Not dramatic chaos, not run-for-your-life chaos, but the quiet, everyday messiness that comes from trying to work efficiently with melted wax everywhere. You slide into your chair and give the tabletop a little tap, sending a tiny cloud of dust spiraling into the warm light. You watch it float lazily, illuminated by your candle's glow like tiny motes suspended in amber. Then you glance at your candle again and notice the wax has already pooled unevenly. Of course it has. Candle hours are cooperative only in theory. You look around the cramped tabletop, a few ink pots with dried drips caked along their sides, like miniature stalactites. 2 quills, one sharpened to a menacing needlepoint and the other chewed to oblivion. 3 ledger pages warped by humidity, and a blotter that's been abused enough to be legally classified as a sponge. You nudge it aside and try to make space for your elbow, but the candle holder blocks the way. It's always the candle holder, sitting exactly where you want to put your arm, existing solely to bump into things. It's the 18th century equivalent of that one coworker who always stands in the doorway. You reach out and gently rotate the candle so the melting side faces the wall, rather than your precious workspace, an old trick you've learned in this world. It won't stop the wax from dripping, but at least you'll avoid baptizing your documents in hot fat. A mainstream fact drifts through your mind. Offices of this period often had to replace official documents not because of fire or carelessness, but because of wax stains that turned ink into blurry hieroglyphics. It's comforting to know that even centuries ago, paperwork found new and creative ways to betray everyone. You shift your gaze across the room and watch another clerk battling his own candle disaster. His desk looks like a wax crime scene. 3 hardened drips forming a jagged mountain range across his ledger. He groaned softly, scraping at it with a metal spatula designed for, get this, the express purpose of removing wax from paper. You offer silent respect. That little tool is the unsung hero of pre-electric office life. Again? I swear this candle melts sideways on purpose. You're not convinced he's wrong. Some candles absolutely seem to develop personalities. You saw a candle yesterday that leaned so aggressively to the left, it looked like it was trying to escape the country. Your eyes wander to the front table, where the room's messiest system resides, the communal candle tray. It's supposed to be a neatly organized lineup of fresh tapers, sorted by size. Instead, it's a wonky assortment of cones, lumps, and hand-rolled sticks whose lengths aren't even pretending to match. You approach it, curiosity pulling you forward. You pick up one candle, then another. They vary by more than an inch, which is basically a scheduling catastrophe. No wonder clerks are always behind. Half their hours are defective, straight from the supply tray. Here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Some particularly thrifty offices used to collect leftover wax strips, melt them down, and recast them into new candles. Resourceful? Absolutely. Accurate for timekeeping? Absolutely not. These recycled candles burned unpredictably, sometimes slow as a sigh, sometimes fast as gossip spreading in a tiny village. Historians still argue whether clerks did this recycling out of necessity or as a quiet rebellion against administrators who micromanaged everything except candle quality. You gently set one of the misshapen candles back onto the tray and return to your desk, being extra careful not to jostle the wobbling stack of ledgers leaning precariously on the edge. You slide them farther from disaster by about 3 inches and pray they won't avalanche anyway. Gravity has a personal vendetta in this room. Sitting again, you start noticing more micro messes, flecks of soot on your sleeve, a pencil stub so short it's more splinter than tool, an inkpot lid that somehow fused to the table with dried resin, and inexplicably, a single breadcrumb that has survived on your desk through at least 4 candle cycles. You're not sure whether to brush it away or admire it for its tenacity. The candle beside you gives a sharp tick, a sound from the wick collapsing inward. Instinctively, you glance up, then back down, and check your ledger as if something urgent might have changed. Nothing has, but the clerks around you all reacted the same way. That's candle life. Every unexpected sound is either time passing, danger approaching, or your flame deciding to retire early. A clerk 2 desks over clears his throat and tries to straighten his workspace. He carefully lifts a stack of documents only to reveal a small wax stalagmite growing underneath. He sighs deeply, the sound of a man who just found geological evidence of his procrastination. You catch his gaze and give a tiny sympathetic nod. That counts as your first joke this section, the shared tragedy of accidental candle geology. As the hours drip away, you begin to appreciate how this messy environment shapes work itself. Clerks must adjust constantly, switch quills when one snaps, rewarm wax seals when they stiffen up, reposition candles when their shadows fall wrong across the page. Every tiny decision impacts the next hour. It's like office work mixed with mild survival training. Your candle hits another carved notch, and you note the time the way 18th century clerks did, not writing 10 a.m., but instead jotting down second notch completed. It feels absurdly ceremonial, yet oddly peaceful. You lean back slightly, stretching your spine while your candle flame wavers as if stretching with you. A gust sneaks in through the window crack again, and half the flames in the room tremble at once. A collective intake of breath fills the office. You look around. Every clerk stops writing for exactly 2 seconds, just long enough to assess whether any candle is about to go out. None do. The whole room releases that breath together, like a choir rehearsing a sigh. That's your second joke. Synchronized office panic, courtesy of one tiny breeze. You rub your thumb over the handle of your quill knife, feeling its tiny notches and scratches. Tools wear down quickly here. Everything does, from wax to wood to patience. And that's part of the quiet poetry of the place. Time doesn't pass. It melts, spills, stains, and drips. Your eyes drift toward a tall stack of wax scrapings collected in a small bowl at the end of your desk. It looks like a miniature mountain range, jagged and pale. You nudge the bowl slightly, and one piece slides off, plinking onto the floor. You leave it there. That's future you's problem. Then comes the third joke. You imagine explaining to a modern boss that you're behind schedule because my hour melted faster than expected. Honestly, it still feels like a valid excuse. A clerk across the room stands up to stretch, revealing a scorch mark on the underside of his sleeve, a common occupational hazard from leaning too close to the flame while reading fine print. He brushes at the spot as if embarrassment can erase burning. You watch him shake his head and mutter something about buying shorter sleeves next time. Slowly, gently, the candlelit mess of the office begins to feel familiar, almost intimate. The desks cluttered with tools, drips, and handmade fixes aren't signs of chaos, but signs of the strange balance clerks maintain between order and entropy. Every messy desk tells a story. Who rushed? Who hesitated? Who forgot to trim their wick? And as the wax slides lower and the shadows shift across your desk, you settle deeper into the rhythm of their world, one slow, glowing, delightfully messy hour at a time.
You settle further into the rhythm of the office, but something new begins tugging at your attention. Movement beyond the desks, beyond the rows of flickering candles. You rise from your seat and drift toward the back of the room, where a narrow hallway stretches into deeper administrative territory. The farther you walk, the dimmer the light becomes, until the candles lining the corridor shrink from proud flames to shy little glimmers clinging to the edges of their wicks. You step carefully, listening to the soft hush of old shoes on old wood. This hallway leads to the record vault, a room so important that even the candles seem to burn more politely in its presence. You push open the heavy door, and the scent of parchment hits you, dry, slightly sweet, with hints of dust that has waited decades for someone to disturb it. You exhale slowly, letting the thick air settle into your lungs. You trudge between towering shelves packed with scrolls, bound ledgers, folded maps, and bundles tied neatly with twine. Some shelves lean ever so slightly, as though bowing under the weight of their own history. The centerpiece of the room is a long table where 3 clerks sit, comparing documents by candlelight. Their candles are positioned at deliberate angles, elevated on wooden blocks to cast light exactly where needed. It's a delicate setup. One wrong move and some poor clerk will lose half a paragraph to shadow. A mainstream fact drifts to mind. Archival rooms in the 18th century were often designed with minimal windows to protect documents from sun damage, meaning candlelight wasn't just preferred, but essential. You stand in the dimness now, understanding why. You watch the clerks handle their documents like relics, lifting pages with fingertips only, never dragging, never rushing. Candlelight bends along the edges of the pages, revealing texture and age. One clerk sighs quietly as he encounters a blot of dried wax on an old ledger, a tiny glossy island in the middle of longitude records. You hear him mutter, "Was no one paying attention that day?" You resist the urge to answer, "Probably not," which would have been your first joke of the section. You approach a shelf lined with wax tablets. Yes, wax tablets, the ancient kind, repurposed for rough drafts or quick notes. Some are scored with deep lines from quills pressed a little too hard, while others bear faint traces of erased messages. It's oddly comforting to know they use scratch pads just like you. Granted, yours don't melt if left near a candle, but perfection is overrated. As you explore deeper, you come across a narrow desk tucked between 2 shelves. A single candle burns there, tall and untouched, almost ceremonial. At its base lies a stack of reference sheets showing recommended candle measurements for clerks copying records. They're formatted like little time calendars, hour marks, burn curves, expected wax loss charts. You pick one up and chuckle silently. Someone took the time to scientifically chart how fast a candle should die. That's devotion. Your quirky tidbit for this section comes from a memory. Certain offices supposedly used colored wax, blue for urgent work, red for legal documents, green for inventories. But the strange part, some clerks claimed colored wax burned at different speeds. There's no real proof, and historians still argue whether this idea began as a myth, an experiment, or simply a prank on new recruits who believed green candles worked faster because they're jealous of the others. You imagine a clerk explaining this with a perfectly straight face. A sudden soft pop echoes from the table, followed by a hiss. One of the clerks jumps in his seat, waving his hand quickly. His candle just spat a tiny spark onto his sleeve. He pats it out with mild embarrassment, glancing around to see if anyone noticed. They absolutely did. So did you. There's your second joke. You continue walking until you reach the back corner of the vault, where a peculiar object sits on a pedestal. A brass stand holding 3 candles of different lengths, each with carved marks spiraling downward like a helix. This is the tri-burner, a device used to test wax consistency by burning 3 candles simultaneously. Whoever invented it must have been either brilliant or incredibly bored. You lean in, studying the metal notches that record burn time, and run your finger along the smooth brass surface. It's cool and heavy, like the weight of time itself, if time were meltable and smelt faintly of beef fat. A faint breeze sneaks under the door and sets the flames quivering. You freeze, not out of fear, but out of pure candle-induced reflex. The clerks all pause too, like meerkats listening for danger. The flames right themselves and everyone exhales in slow unison. There's your third joke for the section. A room full of adults spooked by tiny fire ghosts. You step away from the tri-burner and let your hand glide along the spines of bound ledgers as you walk. Some are labeled in elegant script, others in the shaky handwriting of exhausted clerks. Each carries months or years of information, grain tallies, tax records, shipping logs, the mundane heartbeat of administrative life. Candlelight makes the titles shimmer faintly, their gold leaf accents catching warm glints. You stop at a ledger left open on a side table. The page shows neat columns of numbers, interrupted by a smudge in the corner. Not ink, wax. A crooked puddle that hardened into a shiny lump. The clerk responsible probably cursed under his breath and rewrote the entire page. You gently close the ledger, understanding the frustration in a way only someone who has just spent hours around melting wax can. As you turn back toward the hallway, you take one last look around the vault. The candles flicker softly, their combined glow forming a warm cocoon that wraps the shelves, the desks, the clerks, and you in amber stillness. Here, time doesn't tick forward. It softens, stretching and settling into gentle wax shapes before slipping quietly into the next hour. You leave the room with that softness trailing behind you, the door closing with a low thud that blends into the steady hush of melting time.
You step into the tax chamber, just as the door's sighs shut behind you, sealing you inside a world where numbers, ledgers, and wavering candle flames rule every breath of the day. The room feels heavier than the others you visited earlier, not because of noise, but because of what the clerks here believe they shoulder, the weight of a kingdom's money, measured not only in coins, but in melted wax, wasted drips, and the length of a single flickering flame. You move farther inside, and immediately the scent of warm beeswax folds over you. It mingles with dust, parchment, and the faint metallic tang of iron-bound chests resting against the far wall. These chests contain reports and assessments, not treasure, but the atmosphere suggests something valuable still lurks here. Authority, accountability, consequence. A long table dominates the room, its surface carved with decades of scratches from quill tips and accounting knives used to sharpen reeds. Clerks sit on both sides, each one hunched over a ledger as if trying to fold themselves small to stay within the glow of their assigned candle.
And assigned is the right word. Candles here are not just tools, they are assets, expenses, evidence. You watch a senior clerk, thin, bespectacled, wrapped in a dark wool coat, pause in the middle of tallying. He lifts his candle, squints at the remaining height, and notes a figure in the margin of a parchment. Every hour must be accounted for, every inch of wax justified. The kingdom must know how much illumination is necessary to calculate its taxes. You drift closer to him. The candlelight catches his spectacles, turning them into two trembling discs of gold. He doesn't notice you, too consumed by his ritual. He dips his quill into ink, then carefully writes, 8th consumed for clerical calibration. Calibration, his word for double-checking numbers that were already checked this morning and yesterday and the day before. But he gives it an official tone. In this office, everything must sound official. Across from him sits a younger clerk whose candle has burned unevenly, leaving a river of wax frozen along one side like a tiny glacier. He anxiously chisels at it, trying to smooth the ridge. You sense his fear, the fear that an auditor will claim he squandered materials, that he let wax drip instead of burn cleanly. Here, even a candle's behavior could be interpreted as negligence. You kneel beside him, not that he senses your presence, and examine his ledger. Neat handwriting, but rushed, columns that slump slightly as they descend the page, as though the fatigue in his shoulders passed into the ink. He mutters to himself as he adds tax totals from different provinces, his voice soft, a little shaky. He knows that if he finishes early, he may petition for a half-candle reduction tomorrow. These small victories matter more than they should. Behind you, two tax officials quietly argue near a cabinet where new candles are stored. Their voices remain low, but the tension forms a thin cord between them, ready to snap. You step closer. I'm telling you, this month's allocation is too generous. The clerks are using more candlelight than recommended. And I'm telling you, the other replies with equal sharpness, that the ledgers are growing, workloads are heavier. Unless you want errors in the border tariffs, we need those candles. They're getting complacent. They're going blind. The first man exhales through his nose, long and annoyed. Then they close the cabinet quietly, as if the candles inside might take offense. You move away, thinking about how strange it is that something as simple as wax could shape the hierarchy of a workplace. But here, in an era when timekeepers cost more than a month's wages and natural light lasts only as long as the sun cooperates, candles rule everything. They ration hours, they ration accuracy, they ration human energy. You wander toward the window. The shutters are mostly closed to prevent drafts, but a thin bar of noon light slices through the gap. It looks pale and far away compared to the warm glow of the candles. A clerk stationed at the window is attempting to use that sliver of daylight to work without lighting a new wick. He tilts his parchment toward the beam, squinting, adjusting his posture every few minutes as the sun shifts position. His neck must ache terribly, yet he persists. Pride drives him. Pride and the fear of being labeled wasteful. You watch as he finally gives in. With a defeated breath, he lights his candle from a neighbor's flame, shielding the spark with his palm. The moment the wick catches, he seems both relieved and guilty. You feel the softness of that moment, the tiny human weight of self-disappointment settle into the room like dust. At the far end of the chamber, a supervisor stands with arms folded, observing the entire staff the way a captain watches sailors on a stormy deck. He notices everything: crooked ledgers, sloppy drips, candles burned too quickly, candles extinguished too early. He clears his throat just once, and the clerks straighten in unison, their spines stiffening as though drawn upward by invisible strings. You drift past him and come to a shelf containing finished monthly reports. Dozens of parchment rolls lie there, each tied with red or gold twine. A faint smell of wax lingers in them too, as though the hours spent writing seeped into the fibers. You pick one up, imagining the countless candlelit evenings that produced it. Cramped fingers, blurred eyes, numbers rewritten until they blurred into nonsense. And then you notice a small scrap of paper wedged between two rolls, a personal note, rare, a clerk's private frustration accidentally left behind. It reads in rushed handwriting, "2 candles short of finishing, requested more, denied. Will redo the entire column tomorrow." You slip the note back. You understand now that this place is not just about taxes. It's about the slow erosion of time through flame, about the economy not merely of money, but of hours, effort, endurance. As you step away from the shelf, the wax-scented air seems heavier. You watch flames shiver atop their wicks, each one bending slightly whenever someone moves. The room is alive with tiny suns, each fighting a losing battle against its own fuel. And yet the clerks work on, trusting these lights to guide their ink, their numbers, their decisions, trusting them to keep the kingdom functioning. You take one last look at the room. The candles seem brighter all at once, as if acknowledging your presence, or perhaps warning you that even here, even in this quiet corner of bureaucratic history, time burns away one measured inch at a time. You turn slowly toward the door, letting the smell of wax and paper follow you out like a faint trail of fading warmth. The fiscal flames continue behind you, steady and relentless, as you slip into the next chapter of your long, candle-lit journey.
You step into the night duty office just as the last traces of daylight surrender to the deep blue quiet outside. The moment you cross the threshold, you feel it, an unmistakable shift in mood that only nighttime work can create. The daytime clatter of quills, the murmured debates, the shuffle of papers, all of it has stilled. What remains is a gentler rhythm, a hushed pulse that beats in time with the long burning candles lined along the desks. The room is darker than any you've visited so far. Even the candles seem to hesitate before casting their glow, their flames stretching thinly upward as though weary from the long hours ahead. Pools of warm gold cling to the desks, leaving the corner swallowed in shadow, where shelves, broom handles, and forgotten crates seem to merge into the darkness. You move quietly between the desks. The shadows lean and sway as you pass, stretching long arms across the floor like slow-moving tides. The clerks here are fewer, only 4 remain for the night shift, and each one appears cocooned in their own silent world. Day clerks scramble, night clerks endure. The first clerk you approach is an older man with round shoulders and hands thickened by decades of writing. His candle is tall, carefully chosen for its long burn time. The wax around the base is melted into smooth, consistent layers, evidence of how meticulously he tends to it. His quill moves slowly, deliberately, tracing numbers into a ledger with the same patience a gardener gives to trimming roses. You linger near him, watching as he pauses to roll his stiff neck. The soft candlelight glints off his tired eyes, turning them into 2 small pools of amber. He is not fast, he is not energetic, but his steadiness feels unshakable. You sense that if someone asked him to recount 20 years of tax shipments from distant provinces, he could do it from memory alone. Night shifts have carved endurance into him. A young woman sits a few desks away, wrapped in a shawl to ward off the creeping chill. Her lamp is shielded with a ring of parchment, diffusing the light into a soft halo that brightens only her immediate workspace. She prefers it that way. Night workers must create their own islands of focus, and hers is small, warm, and carefully maintained. Her handwriting is elegant, almost artistic,
but you notice her eyelids growing heavier with each line. At one point, her quill slips, dragging an unintended stroke across the parchment. She stares at it for several long seconds, as though questioning whether she imagined it. Then she sighs, softly, deeply, and reaches for a scrap of sanded correction paper. You slip behind her chair, sensing the quiet battle she fights with fatigue. Everyone on night duty fights the same battle. The candles may burn slowly, but human energy does not. A faint sound draws your attention toward the far end of the room. A window has been left slightly open, allowing the night breeze to slip inside. It carries with it the cold scent of damp stones and distant chimneys still glowing from the evening hearths across the city. The wind nudges the nearest candle until its flame bends sharply, nearly extinguishing itself. A clerk rushes over and shields it with both hands, whispering something under his breath. Perhaps a plea, perhaps a scolding. That clerk, thin and pale, is the youngest among the night staff. His hair is slightly tousled, and his sleeves are rolled to his elbows. Awareness sharpens him in a way that fatigue cannot fully dull. While the others seem half asleep, he moves with rapid precision, flipping pages, jotting notes, cross-referencing documents. But you notice how his knee bounces beneath the desk. His body tries to keep him awake through motion. Every few minutes he glances toward the hour-marking candle at the center of the room, a thick, segmented pillar whose carved rings indicate the passing of each hour. The wax burned so far suggests the shift still has a long way to go. He exhales through his teeth, tries to settle himself, then dives back into his work. You continue walking, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of silence that holds this room together. In daylit offices, people work because they must. In night duty chambers, people work because someone must. Farther toward the back of the room, you find a clerk leaning slightly over his desk, one hand propping up his cheek while the other scrawls down lines of script. His candle is nearly finished, only a stub remains, but he seems reluctant to replace it. Lighting a new candle too early might be seen as wasteful. Lighting it too late might plunge him into darkness. He waits, counts, measures the remaining flame as if bargaining with time itself. You watch closely as the flame trembles, shrinks, flares, and finally collapses into a faint glow. He sits completely still for 3 long breaths, staring at the wick. Then, with the care of someone handling glass, he reaches for a new candle and lights it from a neighbor's flame. The room brightens slightly, and he seems to breathe more fully again. You drift toward the center of the office where a clock stands, an old mechanical piece gifted to the staff years ago. Its tick is quiet, nearly lost under the crackle of candle wicks, but still steady. A clerk occasionally checks it to ensure the hour candle corresponds. They don't expect perfect accuracy, nothing about their system is perfect, but the harmony between wax and mechanism comforts them, like 2 musicians playing near the same rhythm. You stand between the tick of the clock and the flutter of flames, and for a moment, everything feels suspended. The clerk's breaths deepen, pages turn slowly, ink spreads in tiny, glistening strokes. Time loosens, stretches, becomes something soft. Night work does that. It turns hours into something both heavier and lighter. You take in the whole room one more time, the 4 clerks, the quiet flames, the shadows that cling gently to the walls, the kind of silence that doesn't suffocate, but instead settles around you like a blanket. You step out toward the door as the hour candle reaches its next ring. A small crack sounds as the wax dips over the carved line. One clerk looks up, acknowledges the passing hour with a faint nod, then returns to his work. You slip out, leaving the night duty shadows to continue their slow, glowing vigil, guardians of the hours when the rest of the world sleeps.
You follow the faint scrape of wooden wheels long before you see the cart itself.
The sound rolls through the dim hallway like a tired sigh, slow, uneven, unmistakably heavy. When you round the corner, the source comes into view, the candle cart, a squat wooden trolley pushed by a clerk whose posture suggests he did not volunteer for this rotation, but lost some unfortunate dice game earlier in the evening. The cart is loaded with dozens of candles, thick ones, thin ones, stubby ones, and a handful so tall they seem almost judgmental. Wax dust coats the edges of the boxes, giving everything a faint, pale shimmer, as though the cart has survived a tiny blizzard made entirely of candle shavings. You trail beside it, watching the wheels wobble over uneven floorboards, squeaking with every other step. He pushes with both hands, leaning forward like a sailor fighting against wind. His breath is rhythmic, steady, punctuated occasionally by a resigned groan when the cart gets snagged on a knot in the wood. A candle wobbles precariously near the edge, and he snatches it with reflexes that suggest this has happened more times than he'd care to admit. He eyes you for a brief second, then resumes pushing. Nobody speaks during candle rounds. It's not a rule, but there's something ceremonial about the whole process, like delivering holy offerings to the gods of paperwork and exhaustion. You continue alongside him, noticing that the cart is divided into compartments labeled with hand-painted signs: ledger room, vault hall, night duty, survey archives. The labels have been touched up so many times that some letters look slightly different from the others. Hand-me-down typography, you think. Your first joke of the section slips quietly into your mind. At this point, the cart has more repaint jobs than your aunt's patio furniture. The clerk stops at the first delivery point, the ledger room. He selects 8 medium candles and places them neatly in a wooden tray by the door. A mainstream historical fact floats into your thoughts. 18th-century administrative buildings often had designated wax officers, people responsible for rationing and distributing candles to prevent waste. Some had to record burn rates, flame heights, even wick behavior. Suddenly, your candle cart clerk seems like a very underpaid specialist. He pushes onward, and you follow. The next destination, the vault hall. As he unloads candles, you notice a quirky detail. Each bundle of candles is tied with string made from hemp fibers. Not unusual for the time, but what is unusual is the faint green dye on some of the strings. Local rumor claims that green-dyed hemp string was once used to differentiate special occasion candles meant for ceremonial readings. Historians still argue whether this system ever actually existed, or if it was invented years later by bored catalogers trying to make their jobs sound more sophisticated. You drift behind the cart as it moves deeper into the building. The candle smell becomes undeniable, a mix of warm tallow, faint honey, and something subtly metallic from the wicks. The aroma is comforting, almost velvety. You imagine a candle artisan somewhere rolling their eyes, muttering, "Yes, that's the correct way to describe it," which becomes your second gentle joke. The wheels thump over another uneven board, and the clerk stops to make sure nothing slid out of place. He adjusts a box labeled low smoke wax, tapping the lid twice for good luck. The candle with the slightly judgmental height leans again, so he lifts it out and slots it into a snug corner of the cart. As he continues, the hallway gradually brightens. The ambient light grows warmer as you approach the survey archives, a room with notoriously greedy candle requirements. Surveyors, it seems, refuse to work in dimness. You peek inside as the clerk drops off a load of thick, long-burning candles. The clerks in that room practically swoon at the delivery, offering nods of appreciation like weary travelers receiving fresh water. You file that away as your third small joke. Surveyors, nature's most dramatic candle consumers. The cart proceeds toward its final stop, the communal storage corridor. This hallway is colder than the others, and the floorboards creak more sharply, their voices rising in complaint. Here, spare candles are stacked in shelves organized more meticulously than actual records. Some candles are carved with delicate spirals, test models for wick experiments. Others have uneven bases from rushed pours, the candle equivalent of lopsided muffins. They're stored separately, marked imperfect but usable. The clerk lifts the last box from the cart, sets it neatly on a shelf, and finally straightens his back. It makes a sound like old parchment being unfolded. He exhales slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers. You stand there with him in the soft quiet, the flickering candlelight painting both of you in gentle gold. For a moment, the cart is still, empty, just a wooden frame with tired wheels that seem grateful for the rest. You feel a strange affection for it, the same way you might feel affection for an elderly dog who has spent its whole life loyally trotting behind its owner. The clerk grips the cart's handle again, now light enough to move with one hand. He rolls it toward the storage niche where it sleeps between rounds. You watch him slide it into a recessed alcove, aligning it perfectly with faint grooves carved into the floor from years of identical movements. When he steps back, the cart sits like a loyal sentinel awaiting its next task. The candles delivered, the building glows a little brighter, its countless flames ready to measure the next stretch of time. You take one last look at the empty cart and feel something slow and warm settle in your chest. Here, even mundane tasks like delivering candles feel woven into the rhythm of the building itself. The air seems fuller now, softer, as though the candles you helped deliver, simply by walking alongside them, have already begun to smooth the edges of the night. You drift away from the alcove, the faint scent of wax following like a gentle shadow. You drift down another corridor, following a faint vibration in the floorboards, so subtle you almost miss it, like a heartbeat hiding beneath the wood. At first you think it's footsteps. Then you hear it again, a soft clack, clack, clack. The kind of sound made only by something small, dense, and perfectly intentional. You step inside a narrow chamber lit by just 3 candles, all perched in metal brackets hammered into the wall. Their flames sway lazily, casting looping shadows that drift like fish through water. And there, at the center of a heavy oak desk, sits the building's strangest little treasure, a brass timekeeping tool shaped like a tiny rotating mill. You ease closer. The device looks like the kind of contraption a clockmaker would build after drinking too much coffee. Compact gears, small toggles, a little dial engraved with delicate numbers. A thin copper rod extends upward, holding a stubby candle in place. As the candle burns, wax drips into a funnel, which slowly shifts the balance of a miniature weight, which in turn moves a gear. The gear ticks forward, marking passing time with tiny clacks. It's equal parts genius and someone clearly made this on a dare. You lean in to watch the candle slow melt. A thick bead of wax swells at the edge of the wick, quivers, then slides down the side before plinking into the funnel below. The gear responds with a crisp clack. The brass mill shakes slightly, proud of its accomplishment. That's your first soft joke. This little machine is working harder than half the people you know on Monday mornings. A clerk sits nearby, chin propped in one hand, quill dangling loosely between his fingers. He's watching the tool with a dreamy expression usually reserved for campfires or freshly baked pastries. When the device clacks again, he nods in approval and notes something on a small slate tablet. His handwriting looks barely awake. A mainstream historical detail hums to the surface. Workshops in the 18th century were notorious for producing odd hybrid gadgets, mixing candle mechanics with water clocks, sand timers, or simple lever systems. The idea was always the same. What if we could measure time more precisely without spending a fortune? This brass middle is a perfect example of that ambition, half innovation, half stubborn refusal to buy a real clock. You circle the desk slowly. The shadows dip and fold with every step you take. Behind the device rests another timekeeping experiment. A dual-wick candle set on a double-pan balance scale. Two flames burn side by side, their dripping wax shifting the pan slowly. The device creaks occasionally as the weight changes. Someone scrawled "Works" on the base in chalk, as if even they weren't convinced. The candle flames flutter as a light breeze enters through a narrow crack in the window frame. The shadows stretch tall, then shrink back to nothing. You exhale, letting the movement of light and dark wash over you. A soft scraping sound pulls your attention downward. The clerk is gently rotating the brass mill to reset the mechanism. He turns it like someone adjusting a fragile ancient relic, though it's really just a determined little gearbox powered by molten cow fat. Still, you can't help but admire the dedication. These clerks lived in a world without digital displays, timers, buzzers, or anything resembling instant feedback. Time was something you measured with fire, and tools like this made that possible. You watch the clerk finish his adjustments, close his ledger, and rub his tired eyes. He stands slowly, stretching stiff shoulders, then picks up the candle stub from the device. The flame has just died, leaving a thin curl of smoke rising like a fading ribbon. He turns the stub in his fingers, examining it closely as though searching for the moral of a story told in wax. Satisfied, he drops it gently into the slow bin and selects a fresh candle from a small crate. This one is shorter, with a more centered wick. He places it carefully into the copper holder, securing it with a twist of the brass clamp. When he lights it, the new flame springs to life with a soft whoosh, brightening the space around it just enough to bring the wall's grain into clearer view. The brass mill quivers, prepared to begin its next slow dance with time. You take a step back, letting the rhythmic clack settle deep into your mind. Something about the way it echoes through the small chamber makes your heartbeat sync with it, slow, steady, unhurried. As you leave the room, the tiny device continues marking time behind you, measuring the hours in melted wax, tiny gears, and the quiet dedication of clerks who refuse to let the dark swallow their work.
You follow a faint scorch mark along the floorboards, an irregular black ripple that snakes toward a doorway like a warning. Enter if you dare, but maybe bring a bucket. You step inside a cramped chamber where the air smells faintly of caramelized wax and very slightly of panic. This, you'd quickly realize, is the part of the building where clerks keep the tools, hacks, shortcuts, and regrettable experiments they'd prefer supervisors never discover. Your eyes drift first to the walls. They're lined with burn marks in the general shape of candle silhouettes. Some marks are thin and elegant, like a flame-only pencil could have drawn them. Others are blob-like disasters that scream, "Someone definitely knocked over a candle while trying to kill a moth." There's even one scorch mark suspiciously shaped like a boot print. You don't ask questions. A workbench sits in the middle of the room, littered with objects that look like they belong in a mad inventor's attic. Half-trimmed wicks, bent candle holders, tiny spoons, tweezers, funnels, a pile of burnt matches shaped almost poetically like a sad bouquet. A thin trail of wax winds down the bench's side and spills onto the floor, forming a hardened puddle that crunches under your foot when you step closer. And there, right at the edge of the bench, sits the star of this chaotic gallery, a tall metal contraption resembling a tripod with a clamp at the top. A handwritten label dangles from it. Anti-tilt candle stabilizer, prototype 2.
It looks like something designed by a person who both feared and deeply respected gravity. You tap it gently. It wobbles, squeaks, and then slowly rights itself. It works, sort of. First joke of the section, it's the candle equivalent of a toddler learning to walk. Next to it lies a small notebook filled with frantic sketches. One depicts a candle fixed inside a rotating cup. Another shows a candle suspended on springs. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Many 18th century offices struggled with drafts, desk wobble, and poor candle quality, leading to a surprising number of small fires. Clerks often improvise tools to keep flames safe, or at least slightly less terrifying. You run your finger across the notebook's margin and notice a note scribbled sideways, "Test later, after lunch. Avoid open window this time." The word avoid is underlined 3 times. You imagine what must have happened during the window incident, and your imagination does not paint a peaceful picture. A soft thunk makes you turn. Behind you, a clerk steps into the room holding a candle whose entire top half has melted at a 45-degree angle, like a wilted sunflower. He pauses when he sees you, looks down at the sad candle, and sighs the sigh of a person who's had a long week. Without ceremony, he tosses it into a wooden bin labeled suboptimal but still flammable. Your second joke comes easily. This bin is basically the candle version of a clearance rack. The clerk then rummages through a drawer, pulling out objects until he finds what he wants, a tiny metal hat. That's the only way to describe it, a little dome meant to sit atop a flame. "Draft cap," he mutters, sliding it onto the candle he's trying to rescue. This quirky tool slows the burn, helps the flame stay straight, and reduces the chance of desk ignition. A fringe bit of history flickers up. Some offices in coastal regions used miniature lantern-style covers over candles, claiming they were inspired by sailors' storm lamps. Historians still argue whether this was practical innovation or just sailors showing off and clerks copying them. You watch the clerk adjust the cap, tighten the clamp, and nod to himself as though performing a sacred ritual. Then he leaves the room without a word, the candle now wearing its tiny hat of safety. You wander deeper. The back of the chamber is a jungle of wax strips, molds, and improvised candle rescue kits. One shelf is dedicated to trimming tools, some normal-sized, others so large they resemble gardening shears. One tool is labeled Precision Tallow Cutter, though its blade looks anything but precise. Nearby is a jar of wick trimmings that someone has labeled Possible Future Uses, the question mark speaking volumes. On the opposite shelf sits a row of cooling trays. Each holds experimental candle blends, beeswax mixed with tallow, tallow mixed with resin, resin mixed with something uncomfortably sparkly. One candle is shimmering faintly in the low light. You lean in and read the tiny tag beneath it. "Do not burn indoors." You take a cautious step back. Below the shelves is a long strip of wood along the floor with dark, smoky streaks. That strip is the unofficial testing ground. It tells stories, even though the clerks never would. One mark is wide and dramatic, as though someone knocked an entire candelabra onto the floor. Another looks like a candle tried to escape and didn't make it far. A smaller mark suggests a candle may have exploded. You raise an eyebrow. Yes, exploded. It's rare, but poorly mixed wax or trapped air pockets sometimes caused sudden pops. The tiniest pop could fling molten wax across a desk. Not common, but not unheard of either. You find yourself imagining a clerk calmly working when suddenly, pop, a blob of hot wax lands on his ledger. He gasps, then scribbles a note in the margin, "Unexpected wax event, adjust batch." Another object catches your eye. A narrow copper chimney with a tiny hinge door. A handwritten note reads, "Night shift, use when flame acts weird." No explanation, just weird. That's your third soft joke. At least one clerk here is absolutely done with trying to describe candle behavior scientifically. You examine a long bench dedicated to accident prevention. Here, clerks have assembled a surprisingly sophisticated set of hacks: a weighted base to prevent tipping, a sand-filled tray to catch runaway wax, a series of brass hooks to suspend candles above ledgers, a reflective backplate to double the perceived light, and a bizarre wooden box labeled Emergency Flame Dropper. You lift the lid. Inside is a spoon tied to a string. You blink. That's all it is, a spoon on a string. You stare at it for a second before realizing the purpose. If a candle tips dangerously, you yank the string to drop the snuffer spoon onto the flame. Ingenious, ridiculous, and exactly the kind of invention that emerges when people are desperate for safety but on a very tight budget. You let the lid fall shut gently. As you move toward the exit, you take in the whole space again. The scorch marks, the inventions, the disasters waiting to happen, the clever solutions to problems no modern worker ever thinks about. Here, innovation and chaos hold hands. Nothing is perfect, but everything is necessary. You leave quietly, closing the door behind you, careful not to disturb whatever half-melted experiment is cooling on the nearest tray.
You step into the surveyor's annex, where the air smells faintly of ink, parchment, and that unmistakable tang of wax burned just a little too low. The room is smaller than the night chamber, yet it hums with a peculiar energy, as if the combination of careful observation and candlelight somehow concentrates attention into a tangible substance. You notice immediately that the clerks here do not merely tally numbers, they measure everything, from the width of shadows to the length of flickering flames. One clerk sits at a slanted desk, chin resting in one hand, quill poised in the other. A stack of tiny wax strips lies beside him, each marked with the date, the hour, and a cryptic notation about how far the candle burned. A mainstream fact flits into your thoughts. 18th-century surveyors often relied on candle-based timing for precise measurements of distances and intervals in official work, particularly when mechanical clocks were too expensive or unreliable. You lean closer, watching the wax strips form delicate curls on the strips like miniature sculptures. A quirky detail captures your attention. Some clerks insisted that a candle's personality affected measurements. One particularly stubborn stub apparently refused to burn in straight lines despite repeated trials and became notorious as the rebel. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or simply an elaborate excuse for clerical errors. You can't help a small grin imagining a candle with an attitude problem, deliberately undermining the Kingdon survey reports, your first joke of the section. Across the room, a pair of clerks are testing a new type of candle blend, one that mixes tallow with beeswax for supposedly steadier flames. You watch the flame quiver and dance in a way that suggests it is both alive and mischievous. One clerk jots notes furiously, muttering about vertical stability and flame wobble coefficients. You imagine the flame rolling its eyes at the fuss. A long table at the far wall is covered with tiny instruments, rulers, calipers, and more wax strips. One peculiar contraption is a triangular frame holding 3 small candles. When lit, they form intersecting triangles of light on the table, supposedly helping clerks calculate angles and distances. You tilt your head, trying to follow the geometry, realizing that this system requires a patience you probably don't have at this hour. Fringe history bites again. Some offices claim that candles placed in triangles could focus energy for more accurate measurements. No proof exists, and clerics debated whether it worked or was simply an elaborate excuse for clerical errors. You drift closer to the triangular setup, noting how the shadows stretch and intersect in mesmerizing patterns. Each flicker of wax light elongates a line, shifts a perceived angle, and forces the clerks to constantly adjust. It's hypnotic, but also nerve-wracking. The clerks perform these calculations with quiet reverence, their quills hovering over ledger pages as if the slightest error could unravel the geometric web cast by flickering flames. One clerk leans back, tired, and sighs, creating a tiny breeze that bends the flame. A fellow clerk reacts instantly, shielding the candle with a copper hand shield.
You think, it is remarkable, really, how humans adapt to a world ruled by fire and wax. The room is alive with careful, deliberate motion, slight tilts of the head, faint scratches of quill against paper, the occasional snap or hiss from a wick. Your second joke emerges quietly. Someone should probably teach the candle that gravity exists. Near the window, a single candle burns on a high shelf, its light barely reaching the far corner. It has been measured meticulously to mark exact survey hours. You observe its flame, noting how it flickers in a slow, predictable rhythm, almost like a metronome. The clerk assigned to it takes careful readings every half hour, scratching numbers into a small, worn notebook. You watch and realize this is their entire night in miniature, structured around a tiny golden flame. On a side table, you notice scraps of rejected wax strips, twisted, blackened, or melted oddly. They lie in a haphazard pile labeled, "Do not use." One strip looks particularly dramatic, as if it had attempted to escape the measurement process entirely. You smile quietly, your third gentle joke of the section, thinking about rebellious wax strips plotting silent mutiny while clerks furiously record angles and time. You take a slow breath, feeling the soft hush that only candlelight can create in a room full of human focus. Shadows are long, warm, and ever-shifting. The wax curls on the strips remind you of sleeping cattails, delicate and unbothered by the precision-obsessed humans around them. You walk along the side table, observing the balance between human care and nature's unpredictability in every droplet of molting wax. Finally, you pause at the far corner, where a clerk has stacked a small pyramid of candles, one for each day of the week. He carefully lights the first and times it against a clock, recording the burn precisely. Another clerk marks the second. Each flame is a measured heartbeat, counting down hours that will be converted into reports, calculations, and official records. You realize that in this small room, candles are more than light. They are units of time, trust, and labor, silently holding the night together. You step back, letting the patterns of shadow and flame fold around you like a warm blanket. The clerks continue their slow, deliberate work. You slip quietly toward the door, leaving the flickering triangles of light and the tiny golden heartbeats marking hours behind you. The room's quiet, methodical energy clings gently to your senses, like a soft aftertaste of honeyed wax.
You step into the storage annex for finished ledgers, where the air is thick with the faint perfume of old paper, wax, and the lingering echo of quills scratching. The room is smaller than the main office, but taller, its walls lined floor to ceiling with shelves that sag slightly under the weight of carefully stacked reports. The smell alone is a time machine. You inhale and suddenly imagine yourself in centuries past, surrounded by hundreds of nights spent documenting, calculating, and watching candle flames inch toward their ends. A clerk sits cross-legged on a ladder, sorting through a stack of recently completed ledgers. The candle on his desk burns low, its stub barely more than a wick in a pool of hardened wax. He pauses to check the alignment of entries, tilting the book to catch the dim flame at just the right angle. Historians still argue whether the obsession with perfectly straight columns was practical or simply an aesthetic quirk that arose from too much candlelight and too little daylight. You notice the meticulous way he records numbers. Every ink blot seems intentional, every margin noted. It is exhausting and hypnotic to watch. Near the doorway, a younger clerk arranges wax-sealed packages containing completed surveys. Each package is stamped, tied with string, and marked for dispatch. You notice one bundle has a crooked seal. The clerk flips it over, examines the wax drip pattern, and sighs, muttering a small apology to the candlelight, as if it had personally disappointed him. Quirky historical tidbit: in some offices, clerks genuinely believe that improperly sealed ledgers could curse the next month's calculations. You let out a quiet laugh, the first joke of this section. A modern brain imagining wax curses on bureaucratic records. As you move deeper into the room, your eyes catch a small, curious contraption tucked into a corner. A miniature wax clock designed to track the remaining burn time of a candle used for time documentation. Its design is intricate, gears spinning quietly in response to the melting wax. Fringe history note, some clerks experimented with devices that converted candle length directly into time, attempting to bypass traditional mechanical clocks. Whether these devices were reliable is debated even now, but you can't help admiring the creativity. Across the aisle, a stack of ledgers teeters dangerously. The clerk nearest them props a hand against the shelf, preventing disaster. A soft thunk reminds you that gravity, like time, is relentless. You chuckle softly. Second joke, the ledgers and wax seem to conspire against the clerks, a silent rebellion of paper and flame. You notice a small stool by a shelf labeled Reference Only. A thick ledger lies open, its pages yellowed and brittle. Someone, long ago, made tiny annotations in the margins with an almost imperceptible quill. You lean closer, realizing these annotations include cryptic notes about unusual candle behavior. Odd flicker in west corner, retested midnight, and flame too lazy, repositioned stub. These marginalia whisper centuries of small anxieties, unnoticed by history until now. In a far corner, a lone clerk gently blows dust off a sealed parchment before lighting a stub to illuminate the text. The flicker casts moving shadows that make the rows of ledgers look alive, like tiny city streets frozen in amber. Mainstream historical fact: candlelight was the primary method of extending working hours before widespread daylight lamps or gaslight. These flames literally dictated the rhythm of labor. You drift closer to a shelf labeled Archive Trials, where discarded ledgers await review or disposal. One is partially burned, its edges curled, wax hardened along the margins. A clerk notes it in a small book. Failed candle calibration, redo. The sheer patience involved in cataloging failure is staggering. You can't help a soft joke here. Even failures needed paperwork. Finally, you pause at the center of the room, where a single candle burns atop a high pedestal, its flame unwavering. The clerk assigned to it monitors the others, cross-referencing burn rates with completed ledgers. Every few minutes, he notes observations, compares them to previous months, and adjusts the wick slightly. You realize that in this quiet room, candles are not just sources of light, they are instruments of accountability, timekeepers, and gentle overseers of human diligence. You step back, letting the smell of wax, ink, and aged paper fill your senses one last time. The clerks continue their meticulous work, shadows dancing across walls and ledgers alike. You exit slowly, the quiet hum of flame-lit labor following you like a soft lullaby. You pass through a narrow corridor that smells faintly of soot and burnt wick, following a soft glow emanating from a half-open door. Inside, the candle-making chamber hums with quiet activity, almost ritualistic in its pace. Long tables are lined with molds, containers of melted tallow, beeswax bricks, and small trays of wick remnants. The scent is heady, sweet, and earthy, and for a moment you feel as if you've stepped into a tiny alchemist's den. A clerk dips a quill into a small pot of melted wax to make notes about burn quality. Each drop is measured carefully, then recorded on a parchment chart. Mainstream historical fact: many 18th century offices produced their own candles because commercially available wax varied wildly in quality, and consistency was critical for both illumination and timing duties. You watch as the clerk tests a batch, holding a small stub upright and tilting it gently to see how evenly it burns. A quirky detail captures your attention. One candle is shaped almost like a tiny spiral staircase. The clerk explains that it was designed to slow the burn by forcing air to twist around the wick. Historians still argue whether these spiraled candles were practical or simply a playful exercise in engineering. You chuckle softly, imagining someone trying to read a ledger while balancing a twisting candle above it, your first joke of the section. Across the room, another clerk carefully pours a mixture of beeswax and resin into a mold. A tiny wisp of smoke curls upward, carrying the faintest hint of pine. Fringe detail: Some clerks believed adding resin helped stabilize the flame in drafty offices, though too much made the wax brittle. The clerk gently taps the mold to remove air bubbles, whispering a quiet warning to the wax as though it can hear him. Near the back, a small tray holds stub remnants labeled by color, size, and historical usage. One tiny stub has a handwritten note, the Defiant, apparently notorious for refusing to burn straight in past trials. You notice how clerks treat these rebellious stubs with quiet respect, almost reverence, as if each has a personality. Second joke, a candle rebellion of tiny silent insurgents plotting against order. A tall candle in the corner slowly burns wax, dripping into a carefully positioned tin tray. Its flame casts long shadows across the room, exaggerating the shapes of molds, measuring spoons, and curling wicks. You realize that each flicker is a mini performance, a silent choreography between fire, wax, and human patience. On a nearby shelf, a leather-bound ledger details every batch ever made, including experiments with wick thickness, burn times, and flame height. One entry reads, "Tested 1/3 beeswax, 2/3 tallow. Outcome, slightly droopy but acceptable." Historians still debate how much these detailed notes influenced office efficiency versus being an obsessive clerical ritual. You lean closer to observe a small experiment, a candle encased in a tiny metal lantern. The clerk wants to test airflow's effect on the flame. The flame twists inside the lantern, sometimes upright, sometimes leaning dramatically, and then rights itself. Third joke, you imagine the flame as a tiny temperamental performer bowing after each pirouette. Finally, you step to the center where a large tray holds dozens of freshly molded stubs. Each is aligned meticulously, ready for future use. You can almost feel the patience embedded in the wax itself, as if the candlelight carries the collective effort of dozens of clerks, nights, and small experiments. The room's quiet energy, combined with the gentle hum of flame, creates a sense of calm diligence that settles deep into your chest. You exit slowly, carrying the faint scent of beeswax and resin with you, leaving the candle-making chamber in its soft, flickering lull, a place where time is literally molded from molten wax. You wander into the administrative annex, where the faint warmth of candlelight dances across high shelves stacked with rolled parchment, ink pots, and meticulously labeled boxes. The room hums softly with quiet activity, the combined pulse of dozens of clerks carefully tracking time, notes, and experiments. It's a slower rhythm than the main office, a lull between the night's labor and the quiet anticipation of dawn. A clerk leans over a ledger, quill in hand, noting the exact length the candle burned since the last hour. Mainstream historical fact. 18th-century clerks often relied on candle measurements to record time intervals for official transactions, particularly when mechanical clocks were either too rare or too unreliable. Each flicker of wax represents not only light, but an unbroken chain of accountability, carefully maintained. A quirky detail catches your attention. A candle stub on a nearby tray has been decorated with tiny dots of colored wax. The clerk explains these are experimental time markers, applied at intervals so that the burn itself indicates quarter-hour periods. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just one clerk's obsessive art project. You grin softly, your first gentle joke of this section. Art class meets timekeeping. Next week, we paint the ledgers. Across the room, a young clerk gently adjusts the wick on a stub burned at a slight angle, murmuring measurements under her breath. Fringe detail. Some clerks claim that minor flame tilts could throw off the calibrated perception of the hour, making precise accounting a delicate balance between physics and patience. You imagine the flame leaning just slightly to whisper secrets to the ledger below. On the far wall, a small brass device sits atop a shelf. It's a rudimentary mechanical timer, synchronized to candle length. A clerk glances at it now and then, double-checking burn rates. The room seems alive with an unspoken dialogue between human observation and wax-based instruments. Second gentle joke. Clerks are part accountant, part pyromancer.
You notice a stack of misaligned ledgers, each marked with subtle burn patterns where candles had dripped during night shifts. The clerks handle these with the care one reserves for fragile treasures, correcting mistakes with delicate precision. Fringe history note: some offices cataloged even minor candle drips as incidental time evidence, a testament to their obsessive rigor. You pause by a tray of experimental stubs, each with tiny annotations noting speed, wick behavior, and wax density. A clerk gently rotates one stub, observing the flame's rhythm. You realize that in this space, candlelight is not merely illumination, it's measurement, record-keeping, and a quiet testament to human ingenuity. A small flickering shadow catches your eye near the doorway, the night watch clerk checking entries against time burned. He moves deliberately, recording numbers, adjusting stubs, and making subtle calculations with painstaking care. Third gentle joke: these candles might be the only co-workers who never gossip or complain. You step back, letting the ambient warmth of wax, ink, and human diligence settle around you. The clerks continue their work, shadows dancing softly on parchment and walls alike. You leave quietly, carrying with you the sense of a world where candlelight is not merely functional, but an art form, an instrument of precision, and a witness to the tireless dedication of those who work in its glow.
You follow the final hallway, dimly lit by the last surviving candles, toward the exit of the building. The air is warmer here, heavy with the combined scents of tallow, beeswax, ink, and a faint trace of scorched parchment. Every step is muffled by the thick rugs and worn floorboards, softening your passage, as though the building itself is lulling you toward a gentle slumber. At the far end, a clerk sits alone at a desk near a large window where moonlight slips through and mingles with the flickering candle flame. He is recording the final burn measurements of the night, the wax curls on the paper forming tiny sculptures in the golden light. Mainstream historical fact: precise recording of candle burns was essential for tasks ranging from legal documentation to astronomical observations, highlighting how vital seemingly mundane clerical work could be. You notice a quirky detail. The clerk has arranged small figurines around the candle stubs, little animals carved from wax that he claims helped the flame behave. Historians still argue whether these figures had any actual effect or were merely a personal superstition, a ritual to maintain focus during long, monotonous nights. You stifle a quiet chuckle, your first joke of this section: candle-lit animal whisperers. On a nearby tray, dozens of stub ends are sorted meticulously by burn quality. Some are perfectly straight, others lean dramatically, twisted by draft or imperfect wicks. Fringe detail: in certain offices, clerks would even train candles by burning and trimming them repeatedly to achieve more consistent behavior. You imagine a tiny candle gym, complete with miniature treadmills and stretch routines. Second joke, softly mumbled. The clerk near the window adjusts his final stub, tilting it slightly so that the last burn of the night reaches exactly midnight. The light dances across his focused face, shadowing his features with delicate angles. He sighs softly, noting the final measurements in a small leather-bound notebook. Each entry is a testament to patience, observation, and human persistence. You drift closer to the door, taking in the entire scene: the soft hum of wax heating, the tiny flickers of candlelight, and the careful movements of the clerks who maintain it all. Each flame is a heartbeat, a unit of measured time, a silent observer of the night's slow passage. Third gentle joke: these candles could probably outlast your Wi-Fi connection. As you step into the corridor beyond, the building seems to exhale. Shadows pull back, wax scents fade slightly, and the faint hum of the night settles like a quilt over everything. You pause, letting your eyes drink in the memory of careful hands, meticulous measurements, and countless hours spent in dialogue with fire. The night feels vast and serene, wrapped in a quiet golden glow that seems to follow you even as you walk away. Outside, the cool night air brushes against your face. You close your eyes for a moment, carrying with you the rhythm of wax melting, flames flickering, and time measured not by clocks, but by human patience and candlelight. The world is calm, soft, and full of gentle, glowing presence. Now that the night's journey is winding to a close, you can let your body soften into the rhythm of your own breath. Imagine the flickering candlelight fading gradually, shadows stretching longer and thinner, and the warmth of wax and tallow melting slowly into memory. Each step you took alongside clerks and their delicate instruments is now a gentle imprint on your mind, leaving behind a subtle pulse of calm curiosity. The smells, the honeyed wax, the faint soot, and the old parchment linger in the air of your imagination, comforting and familiar. You can picture yourself reclining slightly, perhaps with a soft blanket or a pillow propped just so, letting your muscles loosen, letting your eyelids weigh heavier with each blink. The meticulous work of measuring, recording, and observing has passed, leaving a quiet order behind, like a lullaby for the mind. Even the smallest details, the curl of wax on a stub, the tilt of a flame, and the delicate tap of quill on paper, slow down and stretch into a languid rhythm. Each tiny movement becomes a whisper, a soft cadence that harmonizes with your own heartbeat. You might even find your thoughts floating gently alongside the clack of brass gears or the sway of candlelight, unhurried and warm. Let the historical minutiae fade like gentle candle smoke rising into a darkened chamber. The debates, the quirky inventions, and the tiny rebellions of wax are tucked away safely into your subconscious like little treasures waiting for a dream. There is no urgency here, no need to turn pages or finish notes, only the soft exhalation of time measured in flame and patience. Now dim the lights, feel the weight of the day slide from your shoulders, and let your mind drift into the warm, steady glow of history. Let sleep find you easily, softly, and thoroughly.